Okay, so we got that very interesting presentation, and I think some of the aspects that the prof did mention in his talk, we are going to be hearing it filter through in this part of the discussion. So this one is going to be looking at building a future fit workforce. We're going to try and understand what does that mean in 2023, but also try to understand how do you retain staff? How do you reskill? Especially you find that there are instances where when you talk about reskilling, it brings elements of fear because people don't know, are you reskilling because we're going to be restructuring, and does that mean that I've got a place within the organization, or does that mean that my future may be somewhere else? And the future is scary, especially when we don't know how all of these things are going to affect us. But also, I think in the Q&A discussions between the audience that is watching us virtually and those who are in the room, I would actually like to hear your experiences when it comes to what the prof spoke about when it comes to remote work and hybrid work. Has it been easy or difficult to convince your team that you don't want to work in the office anymore and you'd rather come in twice a week as opposed to the 5 days of the week that most people probably did pre-COVID? So these are some of the things we are going to be talking about: talent acquisition, development, retention, and how all of these emerging technologies are reshaping the work processes. So I'm going to welcome the two individuals that I'm going to be having a conversation with. And with us in the room, we are going to be joined by Tony Vicente, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Adept IT. And as he walks onto stage, I'll just read a little bit about him. He was appointed the Chief Strategy Officer of Adept IT in September 2018, and over the years, his role has changed from Chief Strategy Officer to Chief Operating Officer. Thank you so much, Tony. If you can have a seat.
Thank you.
Let's give him a round of applause. Great.
Good morning.
And I like this one because we're talking about, hybrid and connecting remotely. And we actually do have one of our panelists connecting remotely. And I promise we did not have this all planned. It just worked out the way that it did. And this one is Prof. Khumbulani Mpofu. He is the Professor of Industrial Engineering at the Tshwane University of Technology. And a little bit about him: he is the Gibela Research Chair in Manufacturing and Skills Development. And he is a NRF-rated researcher with a passion for industrial engineering. So the prof is going to be joining us shortly. We should be able to see him on screen, and there he is. Prof, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's see if he can hear us. I think he's on mute. Is he? Yes, no. Prof, are you on mute? Let's see what happens when you unmute yourself.
Prof, I'm not
So
doing
I'm not
this by
sure if you can
myself.
hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Fantastic.
Okay, great.
Good morning to you with the audience. Unfortunately, I cannot be there today, but I guess technology is helping.
And as I was telling the audience, it just worked out in a very interesting way. So thank you so much for emphasizing this idea of remote work, which I'm really enjoying. So we are going to get into the actual meat of the conversation. And as I mentioned, it's about looking at what a future fit workforce entails. And if there's anything that comes to mind during this particular discussion, please have your questions on standby. We are going to open the floor after the panel discussion, and this includes for those who are watching us virtually. So, Tony, let me start off with you. I mean, you caught a bit of what the prof was saying. And it now brings me to the question that with all of these changes, with everything that's happening with ChatGPT technology, AI, automation, when you go back to basics, do you get a sense that we truly understand what is happening around us? Or are we all just moving and feeling our way through the dark, and those who get it, and those who don't try and play catch up?
Well, thank you for following a professor who does this full-time researching workforce dynamics. It's great. I'm going to apply a bit more maybe a pragmatic approach, not a research approach. We're in an interesting place. It reminds me of COVID when it started. Really, no one knew what we were facing. It was a brand new thing. And today we see organizations, including ours, facing this tsunami of change and struggling to find how to prioritize the strategic initiatives, balancing technology and operating models, etc., and finding this path in this constant change, which is the constant, but it's obviously moving a lot faster. I believe that the real challenge that we've got is that this change that we face, which is driven by technology, people associate that with a tagline to say it's disruptive technology, AI is going to take 30% of our workforce away. It's possible. But there's a balancing thought in the way we think about our workforce and the way that shapes our decisions, is that technology by itself is not disruptive. It's new business models that change the status quo which become disruptive. So can I give an example of that?
Sure.
So when we have an emerging need in the market, let's use the example of people looking for cheaper, more personalized holiday accommodation. And we have now technology that allows us to share assets between people and to provide a whole different experience because there's these technology platforms and there's enough innovation to rethink a total business model and create an Airbnb. That rethought business model is what really becomes disruptive. So where am I going with this? It is true that technology frightens because we cannot fully understand yet the full impact of where this is going. But I think what becomes clear is that the critical skill that we need today is customer centricity and innovation. Because it's at that confrontation of technology, emerging market needs, the ability to bring this together, conceptualize a new solution, where it really starts to provoke the thing that frightens us, which is disrupting our existence, disrupting our organizations, the way they work, and impacting on the workforce.
Prof, let me come to you here. I mean, the reality on the ground, how are you seeing it? Because you also had a very interesting point, because you also are interacting with students. And as I mentioned, part of this discussion is about those skills and where we go and what the future of work is going to look like. But what are you seeing on the ground in terms of all of these changes?
So from the work that we're doing, we are realizing that partnerships are becoming more and more critical. And this is why I'm joining the interview online, because I'm looking for partnerships in Africa. I'm actually in Rwanda, Kigali. We've got an AfriLabs workshop that is taking place, where we are being motivated to do education in an unconventional way and look at education from a different perspective. And practically back in South Africa, we have established at the Tshwane University of Technology the Institute for the Future of Work, which is a precipitation of years of effort where we've sought to embed entrepreneurial approaches to how we educate our students and practically take them through those experiences through engagement with like-minded partners. And a particular example that I want to give there is a GIGS project that was given to us by an industry partner. And the project was executed by students in collaboration with other partners who are in the industry. And students learned how to do real industrial work that is being utilized in the industry space in real time, so that there is no gap between the education effort that is taking place in the class and what they then practically experience later on. And it speaks exactly to what Tony speaks about in terms of the technologies for leisure. Our involving our students in this kind of real problems to solve for the assignments rather than giving them fictitious setups will ensure that they are ready to deal with the future changes that we're looking forward to having. And we are grateful that we have such partners who are able to tag along with us in the work we do.
Prof, that's quite interesting, and we'll come back to that in terms of the work you're doing, but also how do we, take things to the next level, especially when we bring in the learning institutions in forming those partnerships with the private sector. Tony, let me come to you here. I mean, you mentioned that it's a complex landscape. Lots of things are changing, but I want to come to you as your role as the Chief Operating Officer at Adept IT. What are some of the challenges that you may have seen where companies are grappling with all of this? And I suppose from your perspective as well, let's draw from your experience at Adept IT. What are you saying?
So we talk about workforce, and I would say the very few companies would not admit that they're struggling to unify the workforce. Okay. So we spoke about the new ways of communicating. I mean, it is truly unbelievable, right? We communicate in a far more seamless way. We can access talent all over the world. We can work from the beach. I hope my guys are not working from the beach, but they can work from the beach. So, I mean, there's an e-learning, the ability to access knowledge at any time, for any problem. It's an amazing thing. But here's the things we're really still trying to figure out. People are social animals. We need to belong to tribes. Tribes have a certain set of behaviors. Our best way to learn behaviors is through observation. Our children learn from us by observing what we do, and this is just the strongest form of learning. It's really difficult to drive development of new talent remotely. Development of new talent in an environment where you have very little touch points with one another in that perspective. It's not to say you can't mentor. I believe that unifying a workforce means people need to be mentored or be mentored somebody. That's the true fiber of an organization. And it's not that you can't do it over a two-dimensional screen. I just think it's far more difficult. So people have innate behaviors. I'm going to make another example of COVID. I don't know, COVID for me is one of these things that spurred so much of this change. I remember during COVID, a couple of experts, many experts in fact, saying, we will never fly again. This idea of being stuck in a flying suppository with thousands of people, breathing their germs onto us to go and have meetings around the world, it's gone. It's gone forever. I'm on a plane tonight. It's packed. You cannot travel anywhere. People still need to behave in certain ways which are just innate to our behavior. So I think that this is where what we're grappling with. We're grappling with the blend of new technologies, the advantages it brings to us, with some of this human dynamic, unifying our workforce, retaining our talent, making sure they're not poached internationally, and ultimately to drive that human connect.
Yeah. I want to put you on the spot here. And on the idea of remote work, I mean, it works for some companies and some companies it may not, especially if it's a company whose work culture is reliant on those strong personal or interpersonal relationships in the office, high levels of engagement, etc. Strong candidate is in front of you in an interviewing process. He or she makes it to the end. They tick off all your boxes. The only thing they say is that I want to work remotely. What do you do with that? Is that a deal breaker for you? He or she ticks all your boxes. They are who you are. It's a perfect fit for Adept IT. The only thing is, I don't want to come into the office.
No, it's a challenge of every day. Every day we find that
challenge.
You
hire them? Is it a go or you?
We do.
Okay.
We do. At this point in time, we do. I would say that in some professions, we have developers, for example.
Right.
They really can be extremely effective working not on the beach, but just about anywhere.
This beach thing is going to be.
Yeah, but it stuck with me, and so we do absolutely do hybrid work. We don't enforce back to office, but I can't say that's a closed topic. It's every day we see pros and cons to that decision.
Yeah. Prof, I mean, we talk a lot about the learning institutions, and it's quite easy to be talking about a lot of these changes and say, well, what are the universities doing? What are the TVETs doing and the colleges? Without understanding perhaps some of your challenges on the ground. I mean, you spoke about the need for partnerships, but let's take it back a little bit here. What challenges are you experiencing at a university level in terms of trying to help us with the skills gap in preparing our learners for this future that we're talking about?
So I just want to concur that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Prof, you still with us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Super. I just want to concur with Tony that I think there are professions where it works perfectly to be remote. But for example, as you can see with my logo, I'm into transport manufacturing, and obviously I train engineers who work in this context. So there's no way you're going to make a physical product virtually, right? Even if you've got robots running your factory, you will need some degree of presence of people to be involved in the process. So in our educating the young people, we need to prepare them for both worlds. We need to prepare them for the world where they need to come and hold things. For example, the JIG project that I spoke about earlier on, we can't teach you how to build things, especially from a manufacturing perspective, when you're virtual, right? And even with the educational institutions that generally run a mode of online learning, or they are understood to be distance learning, when it comes to areas of education like engineering, they need to have some hands-on part of the work they're doing. And this is very important because at the end of the day, they are going to work in a physical factory. The planes that Tony was speaking about, that he's going to be jumping onto later on today, somebody needs to make it. And so our students need to understand both worlds. And we are doing that because at the same time, we're teaching our students through virtual reality means. So we've developed quite a lot of content, which we have been exploring partnerships with TVETs on how we can deploy these at TVETs. And particularly because what we find is that some of the TVETs cannot afford some of the infrastructure to train their workforces or their students on specific kind of techniques, and the only thing they would do is read a book. So rather than read a book, being immersed in a virtual reality environment will give you a far better experience. Not that it replaces the actual physical training, but there are some professions where things can happen online, like for example, where it's maybe a lot of software work that needs to be done. You can program from anywhere. That shouldn't be a challenge because there isn't much physical things to deal with. But even those instances where you need to program, sometimes you need to see how the program behaves, and you need to get in touch with the physical world. So we can't be hard and fast about. Now we're moving away from a physical world and becoming totally virtual in some contexts, but at some point, that mentorship, that engagement, this is why I'm in Rwanda. If this this virtual setup was a solution, I wouldn't have come to Rwanda. But it's not a solution, and I've managed to get in touch with people that I wouldn't have got in contact with if I was just joining for a specific slot online. So for me, that also speaks to how we're educating our young people and preparing them for the future of work that is before us.
What more do we need to be doing? Because a lot of the times when I engage with a lot of the corporates, they say that they can't find the skills. And then when I have engagements at certain events with, say, the Minister of Higher Education, he says, well, the graduates are there. It's just that sometimes the corporates are not rethinking their recruitment processes. They tend to look at the bigger universities for these skills, and they're leaving those who are in the vocational space out of the conversation or out of that recruitment pipeline. How do we change the mind shift here when it comes to involving a lot more of the corporates who are looking for these skills of the future and connecting them with the vocational institutions. Have you given some thought on how we can change that?
We've gone beyond giving thought, because for us, we've actually engaged with partners. And this is why I always will go back to the partnership thing, because I think we need to, maybe there's a line that we need to delete. The line between this is you're in academia, you're being educated, and the line of being in, actual practical work. I think we need to delete that line in the future of preparing young people for the future of work, because that's where the problem starts. The educators who are educating these young people are not up to speed with what is taking place in the industry, and then already there's a gap there. But if organizations can also open up their doors without necessarily giving contracts to young people to come and get experience, but allowing young people, while they're still studying, to get some exposure in their workplaces. And I'm not sure how my fellow panelist, Tony, is doing that in his organization. But before they get their degree or before they get their diploma, that they can spend time understanding what is actually happening, whether they're during their breaks or during their 2 weeks, that organizations can open up their doors and say, you know what, we want to partner with universities that are training people along these lines and make sure that there's exposure, not just for the students, but also for the people who educate them. Because sometimes there's also that gap that you've been in the university for 20 years and you celebrate that and you forget that I'm not in touch with the industry. And this is why for us, an approach where we're making sure that not only the students go to the industry, but also when our lecturers do projects, they go to industries where they can be involved in understanding what is actually happening on the ground, so that can be translated into knowledge and can be translated into an understanding of how this evolution around knowledge is taking place in the context of, preparing our educational institutions. Because for me, it's not just about preparing the students, it's also preparing the academic institutions themselves, because sometimes even the way the academic institutions are configured is not fit for the dynamic future of work. And that's a conversation that we must have, because if we don't speak about the static nature of how universities have been operating and how they are not dynamic and how they are not agile, then we're not helping the student, because that hierarchical system continues to give challenges to the kind of graduate that we take out. And then Tony on the other side says, the students that are coming out from this university, they're not prepared for the future of work. They're not prepared to actually come and work here in my organization, because there's a disconnect and there's a line that has been drawn. But if we delete those lines, that will help a lot in taking us forward all. Thank you.
Tony, I'm going to now put you on the spot here based on what he said. In fixing that disconnect, does your institution or your organization allow students to come in and do a bit of shadowing, learn on the job, 2 weeks here or a couple of months, even while you're studying? What is your approach then to that recruitment process?
So we invest at the rural school level already in helping school education around technology be stronger. And so we have a number of schools that we support, and we develop their talent with the view of bringing those students through to our graduate program. We have a very robust graduate program, and we've said it, we have a skills deficit in the country. So we invest heavily in graduates, in students to develop their skills and to create a future workforce for ourselves, and obviously some of it into the market. I would like to comment something for the prof. The strategy we have found to retain talent in this world, we don't have all the answers, but one of the things we think and believe really have a big impact is to drive a learning culture in an organization. It's very difficult to equip anyone, even at university, for the future of their careers. We just heard that 10 years' time, it looks completely different. So our response is that you must drive and foster a culture of learning. And we belong to a global group that has the same culture, and we motivate for people to share their knowledge as much as possible. Teaching is the best form of learning in a way as well. And I believe that, and we do a lot of work also with universities, I believe that partnership, being part of organizational constructs of continuous learning in the workforce is something that could maybe get rid of some of those lines and help organizations retain talent. I believe South Africa particularly, there's a big appetite for development of talent. So this is how we've approached it.
Let me stay with you for this one, and then I'll get the thoughts from the prof. When it comes to that continuous learning, it leads me into the thought around reskilling. How open are the Adapt IT team, or perhaps even when you have engagements with other organizations and they tell you a little bit of feedback about how they're working with their staff? How easy or difficult is it to bring on the idea of reskilling? Is reskilling scary for staff, especially when you're saying, well, your job might not exist and we are reskilling you for a job that is yet to be? Because we found that there was a bit of friction, especially when you look at the banking industry. People couldn't grapple with the idea that there'll be fewer branches and you'll be engaging online. And internally, when you spoke to the banks, they were like, well, we have to reskill our staff. So, if you had a division that used to clear checks, they have to be reskilled and moved to different parts of the bank. And then others will find other opportunities elsewhere because they've moved up to the next level. Is it difficult to convince staff to say you need to be reskilled? How do they accept that?
I would say if you get to a point where you're facing a sudden reskilling, you're in trouble already.
Okay.
And our response will be, and going back to the first point I made, is you have to be constantly reskilling. So the biggest drive we have is to drive a culture of customer centricity. If we understand, in fact, we go further. We survey what is happening to our customers' customers. Okay. Understanding what is happening to our customers' environments in terms of changing their landscapes, the impact of technology, etc., helps us understand what our customers need, and in turn to bring this back home and make sure that our solutions remain relevant, our skills remain relevant, etc. And that must drive a continuous learning, a continuous reskilling. So I just find that if you find yourself at a point where you all of a sudden have a whole group of people that are not fit for purpose, so to speak, for what you need to do, you're in trouble already.
Prof, your thoughts on reskilling. Is there still a skepticism around it? And how do you approach it if perhaps it brings in thoughts of fear amongst your staff when you tell them about reskilling and new skills of the future?
So I want to use our experience as a practical example. I alluded earlier on to the fact that we've established the Institute of the Future of Work. It was launched, I think, 2022, 2021. It was launched at our university, which is not so long back. But what I want to emphasize is that it wasn't an overnight journey. One department in our university, for years, I think since 2013, was trying to find a configuration of reducing the unemployment rate by ensuring that we have an entrepreneurial approach to our education, as I indicated earlier on, and finding the right partners to do that. So the arrival of the Institute of the Future of Work has then happened because on a continuous basis, even amongst the academic staff, we've been continuously and systematically having platforms of engagement where we reflect about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and change the way we're looking at things. And this is why today we have a building that the university has bought so that the Institute of the Future of Work can carry out its activities there. We have various laboratories that are technology driven, that are not ideas from blue sky by the university, but are driven by needs from the industry. So if there are industry people in the room today, there are technology spaces that are available for them to say, you know what, this is where we see our industry going. And we want to get our hands dirty with the students, with the university professors, and develop solutions, technological or otherwise, as Tony has mentioned, that reskilling is continuous. We've got tools that we are utilizing at the moment to help people understand the fourth industrial revolution, not from a very artificial basis, but from a gamified perspective, because the other way of learning now is also playing games. And in particular with these technological things where people have fear of the technology is going to take our jobs, engaging them through a continuous learning process, through a gamified learning approach, which is not the conventional way it's not the conventional way that we are taught. At least for me when I was at university. Now we are utilizing it to teach our students because we reflected backwards and realized that when we were young, all of us were playing mommy and daddy. No one in the room here, even amongst your audience, can say they didn't play mommy and daddy. All of us did, and through that, there was some learning that took place in that gamification of whatever was taking place when we're toddlers, right? Suddenly, when we're older, we begin to think that the only way for us to learn is to sit in a classroom, have a desk, and maybe dream a bit about how that's going to evolve in the future, etc. And it ends there. It can't. It's amazing the amount of learning that we found, not just only with our students, because we take this gamified learning approach with the industry, either as an activity to break the ice at their strategic sessions, and then help them think about the fourth industrial revolution and what it implies for their business, and have metrics that then measure what will ultimately take place. And for me, through this gamified learning approach, what I've also seen is that it's a beautiful opportunity for people from different perspectives, because it includes everyone from the tech side, from the social side, from the HR side, and even from the leadership side, where people can engage in a gamified setup and learn about what technologies are coming up, understand how these technologies relate to each other, because most of the times there's excitement about drones, but no one knows how those drones link to the other elements around the technologies that are being developed, because drones are not the only technologies that are being developed. But if there's a gamified learning approach where everybody gets a broad understanding of all these things, then it helps them get a sense of, how does what I do on a daily basis need to transform as new technologies come into place, and the reskilling process becomes continuous, as Tony has alluded.
Tony, we've been talking about students, we've been talking about young people. Where do the older, mature generation fit in here, and what does their participation look like in this world? Your thoughts?
So I'm going to take a slight angle on what you just asked me
Okay.
now, because you're pushing me into dangerous ground, right? Let's talk about leadership. If you
Okay.
talk about the older,
Sure.
let's say, so if we can generalize and say that the older generation in most organizations would be in management or leadership roles. That's again an area that I can't tell you we have an answer, but we're certainly grappling with the thoughts. Two things really challenge leadership going into the future. One is that data-driven decision-making is one of the biggest derivatives of this new technology. We've spoken about automation, big data, AI, all this thing comes together in data-driven decision-making. And this is a big, big thing already today in business. And so the question is, then do we need experience? Do we need people that are older who bring a bit of gray hair and experience from the past to solve for problems of today? The other one is that the organizational construct is flattening with this new workforce model. The way people communicate, etc., the typical tree hierarchical structures are dismantling and are becoming flatter. So the question then is, what does leadership look like going forward? What does the future for more experienced people look like going forward? Are they fit for this future? And we consider a few things in that. We don't have the answers, but we think about it this following way. Leadership in providing a motivational future vision for staff and a strategy on how to get there, fortunately still remains a human endeavor. So I think that still remains the primary element of leadership, giving people belief in the future, that they're in good hands, their careers are in a sound place, and we know how we're going to achieve the success in the future. So I think that still remains the domain of experience. So there is a future for people with some experience. What has changed, and decision making is never absolute in just a set of data. There's a context, obviously, that we have to always take into account. Consequences of decisions coming from data also need to be taken into account. But what we are saying is, into the topics already raised, new communication skills, new abilities to drive innovation, to create platforms for people to experiment with new technologies in a way that doesn't create a massive collapse, but gives us the benefit of learning, and themselves being open to continuous learning all the time. So I think the older generation, whether it is in continuing growth, whether it is in self-development, still have a role to play.
Not off the hook yet. I'm going to come back to that older generation question. But we've got about 7 minutes left, and I want to open up the floor for questions. As I can see on my screen, we don't have any questions online, but we'll take some questions in the room. We still have the microphones moving around. So if you have a question, if you could stand up and tell us who your question is directed to, either to the prof or to Tony, and then we'll take the responses from there. So any questions? Come on, don't be shy. Okay, there we are.
Thanks. So one of the things that seem interesting to me is it seems like we have a choice when we employ these people. But the fact of the matter is, if you're in high technological areas, our skill shortage is so severe that we've got people that come to our offices that we're trying to interview, and the first question that they ask is whether the role is fully remote or not. And if you say, well, it's sort of a combined role, they exclude you as an employer. It's almost like the roles have changed. We're no longer interviewing employees or potential employees, they're interviewing us. And I think that's quite an interesting dynamic to deal with when you desperately need skill. I think the other thing that the prof mentioned is if we look at, for example, getting skill from universities to come and interact with our teams, etc., it's quite a complex thing to do because, you know, if you approach technology incorrectly, you could actually damage an entire program or a customer experience as a result of that. So that balance is also quite difficult to maintain. So, yeah, I guess my question is, you know, if you also found that employees are interviewing you as opposed to you having the upper hand, and how do you deal with that?
Tony?
So we face this every day. It's I would almost divorce technology for a moment from the dynamics that we face, particularly in South Africa. We have a severe skills shortage. And in any environment, when you have a severe skill shortage, then the workforce starts to dictate their terms to some extent. And so you are forced to adopt that. And so, as I said to you, we grapple with this every single day, and we have maintained a very flexible work environment as a consequence of attracting the best talent in the ways we can. So that's definitely not going away. But there's a couple of flip sides to that. Not just as DaptIT, but our broader organization invest heavily in learning, continuous learning. Part of that crazy investment, we actually pay a lot of money to put people on planes to get them in a massive conference and hire out the whole venue and put everyone together for a week to share lessons from one another. The feedback is outstanding. People absolutely gravitate and love this thing. And I cannot help but, you know, to say to myself privately, this is not happening virtually, guys. This is in person. This is why you're enjoying it so much. So I guess there's a way that you bring talent into the building, and then there's a way where that in turn starts to change in itself. And if I may just add one last thing about that we're finding super difficult with recruitment, is the element of ethics. Has just become far more acute in this world of today. The way we operate remotely, the way we have access to generative AI that can do things in the background, etc. what we find is while we have fantastic tools to streamline the recruitment and user psychometrics, everything online, and it's all filtered, way before it gets to us, the thing we're still struggling with is making sure we hire the people with the right cultural fit and the right ethics. Skills we can always put on top. And of course, I've mixed up a little bit the high developed skill falls from the rest, but it's a complicated situation.
Before we get to that, I just want to quickly get to this one that is online, but we'll come back to you. And this one is for Adapt IT again, so you're going to be on the spot here. And the question reads, what is Adapt IT's approach to justifying roles to employees which require the staff to be present in the office full-time against those who work remotely or hybrid?
So that's a very good question. We have a very federated organizational construct because our business delivers vertical market software solutions. And so consequently, our organizational structures would mirror that which our clients require. And so in some industries, certain skills require full-time presence. And where that's not required, that's not applied. So I would believe that the people who apply for roles that require a different type of operational model would understand it because they are servicing a specific industry, doing a very specific job that requires an in-person presence. Otherwise, we wouldn't impose that on them.
Okay. Did you want to have a...
Yes, if I can ask a follow-up question, I'd love to know how you and your team build a business case where if you're going to apply new technologies and disruptive engagements, how for example, part of that engagement is the fact that IT is going to replace roles. And in South Africa, when you start building that business case around reducing salaries in order to prove the business case for technology, it becomes quite a sensitive topic. And I mean, we speak about reskilling, but in many instances, you do have elder people that still have a book and that's how they prefer to write. And it's difficult to convince them of change. Or on the lower end, you've got people that might not have the ability to upskill into a new role, and yet you're using technology to justify, or using the reduced cost of employees and therefore buildings, operational cost, etc., to justify new technology. How do you guys deal with that?
Okay.
I told you.
No, that's a good question. I'm going to try and answer it with a few thoughts because it's quite a complex question. The first is I'm going to go back to technology is not disruptive, in my perspective. It's business models. And it's actually very difficult to disrupt a business model. Industries tend to migrate towards best practice. In fact, most technology solutions come baked with best practice templates on top of it because over many, many years, the industries have moved to this norm. And so a lot, what we don't see it, but a lot of attempts to disrupt business models fail. Okay? But they happen. The Ubers and they do happen. They're there. So I think let's just take away for a second the fact that technology is as disruptive as such. I think technology in the main augments, improves, drives efficiency. Let me make an analogy. I hope it won't be too off. So today my toothbrush rotates by itself, but I still brush my teeth the same way. No one's yet convinced me to brush my teeth from behind my back. Maybe one day, but not yet. So I think we try all the time to emphasize innovation, customer centricity, this all the time, how to do things better all the time. And so look at technology, how to make things better as opposed to take away. Right? So yes, it's true. We might not grow a workforce as fast as we did in the past because in making current workforce more efficient, we don't need to bring in as many heads as we did in the past. That's true. And the last point I would say, new tech. We look at it through trial, experiments, creating an environment which is safe for people to do small experiments. Bring in Gen AI, add it to your tool, see how it works, trial this, trial that, but in small contained experiments that if they fail, it's fine. If they work out, the business case becomes automatic. So that I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Prof, I'm going to come to you here. There is a question that I think you can answer, and it's come through via the online space. And the question says, where do you rank the development of critical thinking skills? Is this something that the universities need to prioritize in their curriculum, or do you think that this is contextualized in the work environment?
So thank you so much for the question to the online person who has shared the question. But I just wanted to take a step back, and I think there was a question that was directed to me about students interacting with teams in industry or in workspaces. I think that's a very important thing that we need to address. We are not saying that, and I think Tony indirectly has addressed it, because he spoke about how we implement new technology, create a safe working space, right? If we can create a safe working space for technology, why can we not create a safe working space for students who come from universities, so that at the end of the day, they don't negatively impact the client who the organization is serving, just like we do with the technology? For me, it's logical. And for me, it also speaks to this dimension of the importance of being sustainable in our approaches. In as much as we say that, yes, we don't have the level of skills that we need to run the industries that we run in South Africa, but we also have a huge unemployment rate in South Africa. Yes, maybe there are other complex factors that contribute to how we end up there. But as universities, as government, as private sector, we need to say we are willing to play our part, create these safe lending spaces where startups from universities can come in with innovative ideas. And interestingly, yesterday we had the permanent secretary here in Rwanda of ICT saying that they have a policy around how startups can access government business, you know? And I found that very revolutionary, because it implies that the way we are thinking about the future of work, as we put those policies in place that give young people spaces to apply themselves, provide solutions, and of course, safe spaces. I think that safe space aspect is always a key part of it, but allow them to grow, get better at what they're doing. Just like Uber, when they started off, there were people who thought this is crazy, but some people gave them safe space, it got working, and before you knew it, it's a revolution. The same thing applies with generative AI, even though I must be quick to say that sometimes we need to be very careful as well with generative AI, because we don't even know who has programmed it and what are the algorithms that are behind it if we haven't built it internally. And that also poses a great risk in terms of the organizations. But in terms of the question that you got from the floor, the reason why I spoke about gamified learning is because this gamified learning approach is not teaching you things that you must go and study in a textbook. So with this gamified learning approach, we introduce technologies to you, we help you understand them, and then we say to them, choose the technologies that you're going to configure to grow your business, to ensure employee satisfaction, and also to ensure a future viable organization, right? And these things, there's no textbook that is going to teach you that, right? But as you gamify, you play different roles. You've got the tech team, you've got leadership roles, you've got social roles within this gamified environment. And through that, the critical way of reasoning to get to specific metrics is realized. And the more interesting thing is that we then also can induce COVID into this gamified setup where you've got two companies. Actually, we can have 4 companies competing in this market to see who's going to grow the most. So it's real experiential kind of learning where you need to be thinking on your toes all the time. And this is why this kind of gamified approach is not just for our students, but we're also using it for industry who wants to begin maybe shifting the way that they're thinking about what they're doing through this gamified learning approach, because we've got all the elements that from a technology perspective and how they link to one another and how this impacts the performance of the business. So already within the university, we are ensuring that we're encouraging this critical thinking, but also in industry. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to wrap up with one last question that's just come in before I let the audience take a tea break and then we reconvene. And this one, Tony, is actually for you. The question says, what are your thoughts on career pivots or reskilling?
So, I've had 3 or 4 careers myself. So I would say, that's the answer. We all have to reinvent ourselves all the time. So obviously we support it, and we enable it through the environments we create. So I'm fully supportive.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the audience for the questions that came through, and also those who are watching us online. We really appreciate those questions. And if there's anything that has come through online that we didn't get through in this panel discussion, I'll try and see how we can filter it into the next one. So thank you so much to the prof who was joining us virtually, Professor Khumbulani Mpofu, who is the Professor of Industrial Engineering at the Tshwane University of Technology. And of course, next to me, Tony Vicente, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Adapt IT.